Bismillah, Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So people want to pull up the text. We're looking at the Book of Assistance. You can just Google, pull up on your phone, or laptop, the Book of Assistance PDF. It's by Imam Al-Haddad, rahimahullah. And we are on the 9th chapter, which is on reflection, fiqh, which we're going to finish up today. And this is the last part in a series of subsections where Imam Al-Haddad has been talking about the concept of having a wird, like a daily litany, recitation of Quran, adhkar, the acquisition of knowledge, essentially, the idea that you bring structure to your routine as a mechanism for increasing barakah, right? If we were to give a definition to barakah, it's essentially the ability to do more with less. So where you can do more with your time, you get more out of eating less food, out of sleeping less, right? And you think about how people have a certain capacity or magnitude to just accomplish some of the things that they accomplish. Well, that's what barakah is, right? And that's one of the key parts to this, that the implementation of some of the things that Imam Al-Haddad is suggesting here are to be able to now bring more in pursuit of just inward growth, but in that process also yield these other things, right? Increased blessing. If you ever feel very overwhelmed, there's always so much to do, then there's quite often just a sense that I don't have enough time in the day, or on the other end of it, that I just don't know what to do with myself right now, right? There's a day where there's not work, there's a day where there's just emptiness to the routine that I have. What do I fill it with? You know, and both extremes can yield a lot of inward agitation. For those who it's your first time with us, this text is a text on spirituality. Right? If we were to define spirituality, it's essentially the mechanism through which we ascertain meaning from the environment we find ourselves in. Right? How do I take from everything that's around me to not just see things simplistically, but to see them as signposts, that they give to us now depth that goes beyond what is most apparent. And where and how this becomes a very critical thing, because we have a religion that has ritual, but the challenge can come up quite easily that it becomes overtly ritualized, that the idea is that the ritual becomes the ends rather than a means to something. You know, so think about, for example, somebody whose Fajr prayer really impacts them. We're not judging people. The whole idea is to think within myself. If I've prayed Fajr every day for the last 10, 20 years of my life, if I've gone to Jummah every Friday for however many years, I've observed Ramadan for however many years, I give my zakah, I go for a hajj, I do the actions in and of themselves, would you think that somebody who does those things, they would lie very easily to people, or that they would gossip, right? My son just walked up here. You can probably see both my kids come in and out at some point or the other. If my prayer is doing for me what it intends to do inwardly, not outwardly, but inwardly, do you think I would just be quick to yell at my child? Do you understand what I'm saying? The transformative nature of ritual and practice is not something that can't be yielded by just engaging in the practice mindlessly, but if you engage it with a sense of what it's supposed to actually yield, right? The fast, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that perhaps you might attain taqwa. It's one of the verses where Allah is telling you, here's the act, and here's what it's supposed to do for you. Do you get what I mean? The salah is meant to be a protection from fahsha and munkar, the Quran says. So if I'm performing my salah, but I'm still engaged in all kinds of acts that are deeply problematic, right? I sit here with you and we have a fun time. I don't know if this is fun or not, but let's just say fun is the word we use to qualify it. Then we have iftar, we pray together, And then, God forbid, I go upstairs and I just yell at my son and my daughter. Do you see the problem that's there? The challenge can come up. I'm praying with my body, but I'm not praying with my heart. Or I'm not in a place where I'm even thinking about the presence of my inner self in the midst of all of these things. When you live in a society that teaches you to look at yourself, but not for yourself, and decisions quite often, consciously or unconsciously, are not made from the higher self, right? If I stood up, literally my higher self is where my heart and my mind is. My lower self is where my stomach and sexual organs are. Quite often the pursuit is the simple satiation of the lower self and not the appeal of the higher self. And so where we have multiple dimensions to our tradition, that it's not just Islam beyond the name of the religion, but Islam in terms of practice, you have then Iman at a second dimension, which is theology, faith, our Aqidah. You have then third, what is Ihsan, a lot of what we're talking about here, that brings now a third dimension that adds depth and volume. That's how you can understand the beauty of certain things. And then all of it gets encapsulated in time, right? That we exist in a frame of reality that is bound by time, and that time is not something that is infinite. If anything, this world has an end. We have eternal existence, even though we're created beings. We are meant to be existing forever, right? May Allah make us people of Jannah. But fundamental to this is this idea that at this juncture in my life, whether I converted to Islam or not, whether I was born into Islam or not, regardless of where I am in terms of religiosity, observance of faith, even thinking deeply upon theological concepts, the juncture that each of us find ourselves in is not the same as when my 7-year-old comes here and he has the faculties of a 7-year-old. His capacity is of a 7-year-old. What the world sometimes seeks to do in a consumer-driven society is mute certain innate qualities that we have, that just as you have physical maturation, right? My 7-year-old son is going to one day either look like this or look like his mother or a blend of two. Let's hope he looks like his mom. But he's not going to eat the same food as when he was 7 months old, as when he's 7 years old. And potentially when he's 17 or 27 or 37, some of that will change also. His ability to express emotionally changes. If you've ever been around a 7-month-old, they can't do anything but cry. So when you have children in your life, may Allah bless you with amazing children if you want to have children. When you have a child, there's going to be no shortage of people who come in your face when your child is crying and they're going to say, hey, your baby's crying. And you're like, thanks, I didn't know my baby is crying. Maybe they're hungry, maybe they're sleepy. I didn't know you spoke baby. Thanks for letting me know. The only way that the child can express is going to be through the mechanism of expression that they're endowed with at that time. But their ability to express emotions is going to change from the time they're 7 months to 7 years to 17 to 27. There's just organic development there. Mental capacity changes also. The ability to just understand and comprehend and fathom becomes quite distinct. These things have evolution to them, just as we grow in age, right? You don't eat the same food as when you were 2 months old. Your spiritual self, it also has evolution to it. The idea with a text like this is to become both aware of where that evolution is going, so that you're not experiencing a Ramadan, for example, and at the end of it, you feel amazing and spiritually intoxicated, and you're doing all kinds of things you weren't doing, but since you didn't think about what was actually yielding it, it's easy to just go back to what it was before the month. Do you get what I mean? But also, the idea is to become conscious of what's happening as well as what's not really happening. That this thing that I bought, it actually doesn't make me as happy as the commercial thought that it would make me happy. This device, this apparel, this car, whatever it is, it's got a limit to contentment, because it's not built to make contentment happen. It's built to just give complacency. It's built to make you dissatisfied with what you have so that you go and buy the new version of it. So what this does is it tells us, hey, this is where you actually can yield contentment from. And that you have an understanding that contentment can coexist with sadness. Contentment can coexist with grief. The Prophet ﷺ was the most balanced of individuals. He still cried when his son died. He still cried when his wife passed away. He still cried when his uncle Abu Talib died. There's so much that's going on there that still can happen with a sense of balance. Do you get what I mean? The only way that this works, though, is that if you actually practice on what the text is telling you to practice on. Because ihsan is not something that's rotely memorized. The way that you can memorize books of fiqh, you can memorize the do's and don'ts, you can memorize articles of faith. My son, when he was 3, he knew Surah Ikhlas, mashallah. My daughter, she knew it also. My son and my daughter are a little different in their personalities. So my son, when he's 3 years old, he's just reciting it again and again and again, all over the place. But if you ask him, what does it mean? He's not going to tell you what it means because he's 3 years old, right? Do you get what I'm saying? But you can just memorize, and that can be seen as an ends. There's certain things you can only understand experientially. There's certain things you can only understand when you tap into all of your organs of sensory perception. That you begin to actually experience food through its smell consciously. You begin to actually experience food, not through just the hands that are touching it as you eat it, but through the hands that cooked it. Were they made with hands that love you, or were they made with hands that just see you as a dollar sign? And then you can start to taste the difference by what it yields for you after you've eaten it. Your sensory perception takes in all of it, and then your heart synthesizes it. And then through the experience, you can say that, you know what? It tastes a lot different when I'm eating food with my brothers and sisters versus when I eat food in a state of hecticness at the end of a busy work day. And what it does to me as I eat in a gathering that inshallah the angels are descending upon versus a gathering that is only filled with how do we take more from people who already have less than us. What the food will do in terms of nourishing your spiritual self, the experience is going to tell you a little bit different. Do you get what I mean? This is what this text offers to its reader. The idea to experience the world, but experience it not just as a body, but as a soul and as a heart. To not just experience it in terms of what is it that it offers to me, but in addition to what is it that I can give back while I'm in my time here. That I can reprioritize and I can think about this in proportionality to what comes after this world. We've gone through 9 chapters. They're quite easily digestible. If you missed any of them, you can go find all the stuff on our podcast, YouTube channel, and just engage in it as an exercise that sees how the topics blend together and make a firm commitment that says that I'm going to do my best to actually implement some of what this is at a pace that makes sense. So this entire chapter has been about reflection, fiqh. And we're at a point now where the topics that he's told us to reflect upon, they're going to take a pause with specificity, and then he's going to go into a couple of other things before the 10th chapter, which is on the Quran and Sunnah. I want you to think about this also, because it's going to be important to understand. He's talking about reflection before he's going to talk about the importance of the Quran and the Sunnah. And if we don't get to that chapter, we want to think about this as another mechanism of reflection. He's already talked about reflecting upon Allah and the magnificence of Allah through just the creation, the ability of the divine, through just looking at how marvelous things are around you. Reflect even on yourself and look at how uniquely amazing it is the way you've been built. Reflect on the favors that you have been given from the divine and utilizing gratitude, reflecting on the hereafter, reflecting on death. So many things. I want you to take a pause and then we'll go back to the text because I want you to understand fiqh now in this way, because he's saying it's important enough that in your wird, your daily practice, you do this in a 24-hour period. He says for an hour or a few hours, there's reflection, fikr, contemplation upon something. Why do you think he talks about it before he talks on the chapter on the Quran and the Sunnah? I want you to just turn to the person next to you and answer this question. If you've never been here before, don't only talk if you feel like you're saying the right thing. Don't keep yourself from saying what you might feel is the wrong thing. When someone is speaking, just engage in empathetic listening. Not a listening to respond, but a listening to understand. So we can grow from each other's perspectives, right? As a gathering, what we offer is viewpoints, not opinions. There's a difference between things. Quite often within religion, especially this religion, the terminology of opinion gets understood from the standpoint of absolutes. And we want to be able to understand it from the standpoint of vantage points that can help us to think a little bit bigger and delve into these things that Allah built us with, unique from the rest of creation. If God wanted me to be a dog, He would have made me a dog. If He wanted me to be a cow, He would have made me a cow. The Quran says you could be like a cow, ulaika kal an'am, because all you do is eat and sleep and have sex. But you've been given aql. It makes you different from the cow. Do you see what I mean? So let's think about this just to get our energy going and our mind going. Why do you think Imam Al-Haddad talks about the importance of reflection before he tells the reader to think about the Quran and Sunnah as a mechanism for spiritual growth? You turn to the person next to you and then we'll come back and discuss. Go ahead. Okay. So what did we come up with? Why do you think? What's like the wisdom of talking about reflection before you talk about following the Quran and the Sunnah? Yeah.
I guess you have to first reflect on it, understand the root cause, like where this is coming from, and then after that you will need to seek ways how to solve this spiritually.
Okay, great. What else? Yeah. Okay. Other thoughts? Yeah.
We were kind of having a debate about, like, even if we reflect, like, do we necessarily have to know the purpose of why it's prescribed? Like, maybe God just says to do it and then we do it. So, like, we were kind of debating, to what extent is, like, do we have to know why things are what they are?
What's the point of reflection? Or what are some of the points to why we would reflect? What's the whole point to it? Yeah.
Did you say it's like a prerequisite for spiritual growth?
But what is it doing? Like when you're reflecting right now, do you know what I mean? If I went to the gym this morning, right? I know I'm like the hugest person you've ever met in your life. If I went to the gym this morning, does the benefits of exercise only transpire when you're physically exercising? No, right? Like I go to the gym and then Khalid, who's not here today, he and I are at the office, and my wife, like I said to you last week, said, hey, can you go and help me pick up a couch? And then when we got to the place, she has this little like shopping cart thing, and there's a giant couch. And for some reason, thought the couch would fit into the shopping cart, which clearly would not. So Khalid and I have to carry a couch from inside of Stuyvesant Town all the way to 23rd Street and 3rd Avenue and get it into the front door and the elevator and upstairs, all before the halaqa starts last Monday, right? So the physical exercise that I do every day, the stretching that he does regularly, is it gonna only benefit me when I'm doing it? Or is it gonna serve a purpose at both expected and unexpected times? Do you get what I mean? Right? So what's like the point of the engagement of this as an exercise? What are some of the places that you can see it potentially benefiting when you're not engaged in it deliberately? Yeah.
From how I saw it is that reflection, it allows to see the defects or the scratches someone might have, and then he goes into the Quran and a reflection in a mental.
But think about, what is it strengthening for you? What is it, before you apply it to something, the recognition of all of these things, which are very valid, the way lifting a physical weight is going to strengthen the muscle that you are exercising at that time. What is reflection strengthening for you? Yeah.
Something that it strengthens for me personally is just that reminder of gratitude. Like I was remembering as you were speaking a few Ramadans ago that I was listening to these podcasts that asked you to reflect on certain things, so like your daily walk, and you would like look around you and just like pick one thing you're grateful for. So I was like, okay, like these sidewalks that I'm walking on are really big, and I just have a lot of space to walk. And the next time I notice the trees, and the next time I notice something else. Then after Ramadan, every time that I walk on that particular street, I have that feeling of gratitude that I'm like immediately thinking, these are the trees.
So what do you need to recognize that? Huh? Awareness. Yeah, awareness, right? So one of the things that it's strengthening for you is presence, awareness, right? It's inculcating now a strengthening of this. If you walk up and down the stairs, every place you go is going to strengthen certain muscles in your leg, right? If your job has you seated all the time, it's going to have an impact on your posture and on your neck, right? There's things that have like indirect, direct impact on us. Some things are involuntarily done or unconsciously, and they're impacting just our physical being and the rest of us. And some things can be done consciously. So I'm consciously reflecting on something, right? If I'm deliberately bringing myself to a place of gratitude to understand and see all the things around me that quite often escape me, right? My kids and I, we went to watch the new Spider-Man movie the other day, and we walked to a movie theater on 2nd Avenue, and then we walked home a different way. And then we're seeing our apartment from a different vantage point than we normally do. And then I noticed, and my daughter noticed, or my son and I noticed, one of the kids noticed and I noticed, that there's these pillars that come out above the store that's right next to us on the corner of 24th and 3rd, and then the apartment building juts out over it. I've lived here since 2008. I've never seen that before. And one of my kids was like, I've never seen that before, Baba, do you see that? And I was like, oh yeah, I've never seen it. The other kid was like, I knew about it. And I was like, yes, you always know. You know everything. It's great, right? But what it's doing is it's creating an opportunity to now, when you need presence, you strengthen the muscle that allows in moments where it's easy to be devoid of presence to have presence. Because when I'm sitting down and I'm writing in a notebook, why do I love my mother? And then I actually answer the question. Who am I grateful for that I've never said thank you to before? And then I make myself vulnerable and I answer the question and I just write. I'm focused in a way that I'm not ever focused before. The tears are dripping off. My mind is just in the exercise. All the other distractions are away. So what you're doing is you're building that strength and that capacity. Does that make sense? Can you imagine how different it would be if you followed the Quran and the Sunnah with that kind of focus? That there was actually presence in the action. Do you get what I mean? The way that like the water tastes after a long day of fasting. Try to fast in these days of Dhul Hijjah, right? It's very different than fasting in Ramadan. You know, not 1,000 people at the IC breaking fast together, but I'm just sitting by myself on a random Tuesday, Wednesday night, and I'm just eating alone. Nobody else is fasting. This is hard. Shaitan's waswasa is there. It's hard. It's different. Good. That's how you learn about yourself. It's experiential knowledge. But you start to then think within that, when you sip that water at the end of a fast, you eat that date, and you can fast on these days. If you've been Muslim longer than 3 years, you were fasting in these days some years ago, right? The cycle changes seasonally in comparison to the Gregorian calendar. So you've already fasted on this day some years ago in terms of the time. The environment was just different, but you could do it in the physicality of it. I'm saying when you taste that date and you drink that water, everything is just experienced differently. So when you're engaging in these practices, what you're also building is that mental muscle, that focus of your heart, so that later on, when you're walking down the street, you actually have presence. And it doesn't take you. Like me, I've lived in this building since 2008. It's 2023. How have I never seen something that's in the building that I live in for this many years? Do you get what I mean? Right? And that's what these exercises do. And then just think, like, it's just a sunnah doesn't ever even come out of my mouth because I'm experiencing the performance of this prophetic practice with presence. I'm experiencing the recitation of Quran and the actualization of a verse of Quran with presence. It's not just the form, but the heart is also there. The mind is there. All of the sensory organs are there. Does it mean every single time has to be that way? No. But more of it can be like that, and then the sweetness of it is experienced a little bit differently. Do you get what I mean? What do you think? Any thoughts on what I'm saying? If you can't incentivize for yourself what is the gain from it, then you're not going to do it. And last week when I asked people, how has it been for those of you who have been engaged in this practice of reflection, of fiqh, most people said we didn't even try it yet. And we've been talking about it for weeks, you know? And even embedded in that is an opportunity to reflect. Why am I not doing it? Do you get what I'm saying? Shaitan doesn't want you to have presence in the act. This is where moments are magnificent in our tradition, and Allah just looks for moments to accept from us. The moment is rooted in the presence of the inward. And if you just bring the presence to the act, it becomes categorically different in terms of what it yields for both the practitioner as well as the beneficiary of the action. Do you get what I mean? What's the difference between giving zakat mindlessly and just writing a check and pushing a button and you're not even aware of what you're doing? It's not that easier is sometimes better, right? There's all kinds of things that can gain to you residual benefit that you might not be aware of. But when you can automate a donation, for example, then you don't even know what's happening. Part of the exercise is the actual part of the exercise. That's why one of the opinions traditionally, other than like the more modern opinion that you can give zakat to an institution, but traditionally zakat necessitated a transference of ownership, right? When you have that engagement, it's very different. Do you know what I mean? Do you get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? So, not doing things on a default, the default is not always better, right? Like having the presence in the act sometimes becomes important. Most of us are just taught to do it, but not taught to do it with all of us doing it. Do you know what I mean? So we're not taught like why we're praying this, not from the spirit of the law, but with a sense of like, this is how you pray with your heart. This is how you make dua from your heart. Do you get what I mean? And the hadith talks about it. The dua that's not accepted is what? The one that comes from a heart that's not attentive. This is what the hadith says. You know? So why? Because like it's not from the tongue, it's from the heart. So if the heart's not present, then the heart's not present. Does this make sense? Okay, let's go back to the text. Where if you're in the PDF that pops up first, page 34, which is like a few pages into the 9th chapter on reflection on fiqh. Imam Al-Haddad, he says, were we to allow ourselves to pursue the various channels of reflection, we would have to forego the brevity which we intended. Can somebody read from there? Does anybody have it? Yeah, you want to read?
Were we to allow ourselves to pursue the various channels of reflection, we would have to forego the brevity which we intended. That which we have mentioned should suffice the mind of reason.
Keep going.
You should, with each kind of reflection, bring to mind those verses, hadiths, and other narratives relating to it. We have given an example of this by quoting some of the verses related to each kind of reflection. Beware of reflecting on the essence of God and His attributes, in the wish to understand their nature and how they exist. No one ever became enamored of this without falling into the abysses of negation, the traps of tashbih. The Messenger of God, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, has said, reflect on the signs of God and do not reflect on His essence, or you will never be able to give Him His due.
Okay, so let's take a pause here. One, he's saying there's no limit to what you can reflect upon, right? So you can engage in it in various facets of reflection. The things that he gave to us, you can see why there's purpose to it. But you want to also take time to reflect on the things that make sense for you to be reflecting upon, that allow for you to bring more meaning and intention and awareness and consciousness to the different parts of your life. You could Google, like, what should I reflect upon? You can Google questions to reflect upon. You can Google questions to contemplate, to meditate, any kind of things, right? We're not the only people who do this. We don't own contemplative practice, but it's a deep part of our tradition. But if you've never done it, there's people who have done this for centuries, and you can just take from them what it is that works. And you start to think and just engage in a regular practice and regular exercise. Get a notebook and don't think that it's limited. So every single day, you don't have to sit and reflect on that, what am I grateful for, right? If it's going to kind of make things a little bit kind of mechanical. This is why, like, we fast some days, we don't fast certain days. So that you still have a relationship to fasting that allows for some of the days to be a little easier, a little bit more difficult, right? You can change it up a little bit sometimes. Do you get what I mean? But the exercise itself necessitates understanding that there's so many things you can reflect upon. Start to gauge it by recognizing that it's not just the same thing again and again and again. Do you see what I mean? And where Imam Al-Haddad brings to mind Quran, Hadith, like stories of individuals, you start to see how these things are brought into relation with what it is that you know, right? So there's not quantified aspects to this. It's not that I don't know so much Quran. If you only know Surah Ikhlas, it's a third of the Quran in its weight and its value, its ajr, its impact. Right? And you can distill this. Our teachers tell us, for example, the chapter talks very deeply about theology. It gives us an understanding of who God is. And foundational theology to be Muslim is rooted in three kind of parameters. Monotheism, you got to believe in one God to be Muslim. Somebody says, I'm Muslim, I don't believe in God. I'm Muslim, but I believe in more than one God. Well, that's out of the categorical definition of what it means to be a Muslim. The finality of prophethood and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, right? And afterlife. These are three foundational theologies. Belief in Allah is 1/3 of those things. Surah Ikhlas is about that aspect of theology. Does it make sense? Right? You have so much that's there. Imam Shafi says, if all someone knew of the Quran was Surah Al-Asr, that would suffice them. So you just think about it. You reflect upon it. In these different frames. What does Surah Al-Asr? What does Surah Al-Ikhlas? Like, tell me about these different things that Imam Al-Haddad is talking to me about. How do I understand death through Surah Al-Asr? How do I understand the hereafter through Surah Al-Ikhlas? How do I understand these different things through these different things that I know? Do you get what I mean? And don't overwhelm yourself by saying I don't know all of it. Like, you work within the parameters of what you do know. And then you start to say, hey, maybe learning more hadith, maybe learning more Quran would just give me more of a base through which I can understand things with more facets and get more meaning from it. Do you see what I mean? But the main part of it that we want to think about is the part where he is now saying, if you're going to reflect, don't go past this boundary of reflection. Where the Prophet ﷺ even admonishes and counsels his companions and the rest of us that when you're reflecting upon Allah, don't reflect too deeply upon the essence of who the divine is. Because it can create an opportunity that is going to actually have a negative impact rather than a beneficial one. What does this mean, for example? Right, like when you sit in gatherings with people that are interfaith or multi-faith. I do a lot of interfaith work, and everyday people too. I've sat down with people like the Pope and the Dalai Lama. They're nice people. But in understanding what differs, if somebody says to you in like a Islam 101, or you memorize these soundbite tidbits of religion that tell you that this is like how we respond to certain questions and things, and somebody says to you, is the God of Islam the same God as the God of Christianity? The same God as the God of Judaism? Well, in our religion, yes, Islam sees itself as a continuity to various religions, texts, testaments. There's an Old Testament, a New Testament, a Final Testament. That's what we claim we have. You see? But if we were to now think about it in terms of the details, the essential understanding of God in Islam is different from the essential understanding of God in Christianity, for example. Does that make sense? We don't believe in God being a male God, let alone a white man that is God. And that's not to knock anybody's beliefs, but the essential understanding of who God is different. Do you see what I mean? It's not the same. You don't have to pretend like it's the same, because it's very different. In Islam, you read Ayatul Kursi, right? And it tells us that Allah does not slumber. It gives us so much insight into who the divine is. This is where there's essential difference from other theologies. We don't have an understanding of God that is rooted in a God that sleeps, or a God that rests, or a God that eats, or a God that dies. You can understand this without mocking anybody's beliefs. That's not what Islam teaches its practitioner. It does not teach its practitioner to take in arrogance in any form. Even a mustard seed worth of arrogance, an atom's weight of arrogance, becomes a preventative mechanism for entrance into Jannah. Do you understand? So, thinking about it on the individualized level, Imam Al-Haddad is telling us the Prophet ﷺ is telling us there's certain things that we just are not going to be able to understand about who Allah is. How can you fundamentally know what it means to create something from nothing? And the way that that is done. Kun fayakun, says the Quran, be and it is. When you start to get into like the details of things that necessitate a mental prostration in order to be able to yield to an idea that says, I've been given the capacity to comprehend, but it also has a limit. Because Allah is Al-Alim, that's not me. I'm not the all-knowing. Allah is Al-Hakim. He is the most wise, not me. I don't have the capacity to understand and comprehend all of it. This is where the religion exists in a few different frames of understanding, not just two, rational and irrational. It makes sense or it does not make sense to me. Islamic theology is rooted and necessitates embracing what is supra-rational. I don't have to understand it in order for it to be true. Does that make sense? What I'd like for us to do is take a minute and just engage on this point, right? That gives us an insight more so into who it is that we are in relation to who it is that our Creator is. Because it's a negative knowledge of God that we have, of our understanding of Allah. We know who Allah is by understanding what He is not. This is Kareem, by the way. You want to say assalamu alaikum to everyone? Kareem made some of his famous Nutella cookies. There's a tray of them. It's not enough for everybody, but just to let you know that they're there. And first come, first serve. But, mashallah, that tray of Nutella cookies is made by Chef Kareem.
They also have nuts in it, so if anybody's allergic to nuts.
They also have nuts if you're allergic to nuts. Yeah, thank you for letting us know. Great. I forgot what we were talking about. What were we talking about? Yeah, so on this point, right? Religions are about theology. Do you know? The example that comes to mind quite often is when people ask me, like, well, what's the difference? You know, it comes up quite often, for example, when people want to marry somebody from a different walk of life. You can't control who you fall in love with. It doesn't mean you have to deny that you love somebody. But when it comes down to it, and somebody says, well, what's really the difference, right? They're a good person, I'm a good person. Yeah, you're good. Like, that's not what makes religions different from each other. What makes religions different from each other are the theologies. That's what makes religion different from another religion. No religion matches up with another religion 100% on its theology. If it did, then it would be the same religion fundamentally, right? Now, the theology is what informs authority, what informs practice, what informs the why we do what we do fundamentally. And so here Imam Al-Haddad is saying that there's going to be a place where your reflective capacity is also not going to be able to yield you what is going to be fully comprehensible of who the divine is. Allah's mercy, you can understand mercy through just how mercy kind of is understood, right? You can understand kindness, softness. My 7-year-old just told you, watch out, there might be something you're allergic to in it, right? How cute is that? Do you get what I mean? But also, how sweet is it? How generous is it? Literally, he's being Kareem. That's what his name is. Allah is more Kareem than that. You can't even imagine how Kareem Allah is. There's no way of knowing. And if someone was to tell you, well, I need it to understand in some kind of just tangible form, it's beyond your ability to know, beyond your ability to rationalize. That's where the super-rational is what you submit yourself to also. That I am built the way that I'm built. There's opportunities for me to have entry points into it to understand from fundamentally what I experience. I love my kids so much. And the love that they have for me are things that are so real. It gives me courage. I'm so in love with their mother. I love each of you. I feel the love that I get from many of you. Right? Doesn't mean that some of you don't love me, but I don't know some of you. Some of you, it's the first time we met. I'm not going to be full of myself and be like, everybody loves me. But I know some of you love me, and I know some of you know that I love you too. And those experiences, what the poets say, become the mechanism to be able to begin to fathom. What does it mean then to have the love of Al-Wadud, the source of all love? That Allah loves you not because of who you are, but because of who He is. And how can you fathom that? You just get an entry point to it, and then you recognize that there's just certain things that I just don't know. And the danger that comes in is that our religion does not anthropomorphize God in any capacity. In any capacity doesn't just mean when the verse talks about a throne of God that you create now limits where there's meant to be no limits. But also, for example, anthropomorphizing God based off of human interactions that don't honor the rights that we're supposed to honor. So if you have parents or elders in your life that do not treat you with kindness, do not anthropomorphize God in any way, shape, or form. That the absence of love or the presence of certain negatives does not now inform who Allah is. Does that make sense? Does it? Because it's really important. A lot of our perspective of the divine comes from places where unconsciously we take from human interactions that are not meant to be anything other than understanding that this is not who represents God to us. Do you get what I mean? So the way that somebody fails to smile at you, or only points out your flaws, or tells you why everything that you do is wrong, or only works in the parameters of black and white, can only see through what is fard and haram, right? Literally the Hadith Qudsi says that when the prayers are presented and there's inadequacies in the fara'id of the prayers, and the angels, they tell Allah that they didn't do everything they were supposed to do. He doesn't say, okay, we only start and stop with what is black and white, but He says, go and see if they did anything extra. That's like the love and mercy of your Creator. He's telling you, His messenger is telling you who He is. But it becomes hard because when people don't treat us well, we then take it as a mechanism of shaping of what must God think of me in this way, right? There's no anthropomorphizing of Allah in our tradition. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? What I'd like you to do is just turn to the person next to you. What are you taking away from this? Why is it an important part of us in our relationship to the divine, right? Think about it. Because a lot of books of theology, they're written just to disprove other people's theologies. And you can see it manifest if you delve deep into religious study or religious experience. When people get zealous in their religiosity, right? Not righteous, but self-righteous. And there's a difference in the two. It gets to a place where conversations that are not really had if you don't exist at a certain academic level start to be had, and the ability to recognize cohesion is removed because everything is just in the frame of why the way you do it is wrong. You don't even know half the time what you're talking about. Do you know what I mean? Like, fundamentally, most people, they're just parroting somebody else's words. Do you know? And the idea of Tawheed is that of total unity, that of total oneness, and it becomes an avenue for many people to actually become divided, right? That's the trick that Shaitan plays on people. Do you know what I mean? Tawheed does not tolerate divisiveness in any capacity. It is the absolute form of oneness. You get what I'm saying? You want to think, why is this integral to my understanding of Allah? Right? So if you turn to the person next to you, what are some of the things you're taking away from it? What is it bringing up? And then we'll come back and talk for a few minutes. Go ahead. Okay. Let's come back. Any thoughts, any takeaways on this? What you want to do if you've never done before, right? There's a lot of classes that you can access online right now. Seeker's Guidance, Sheikh Faraz Rabbani, they have a lot of courses. The Maqasid Seminary in Allentown, Pennsylvania will have some. There's other resources that you can engage. One of the foundational texts on theology that gets studied across kind of theological schools within like the Sunni tradition of Islam is the Creed of Imam Tahawi, rahimahullah. Sheikh Hamza Yusuf did a translation of it with some like notes to it some years ago. It's like got a green cover. It's pretty easy, accessible. There's a text called Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar that was authored by Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah. It's the Greater Fiqh. It's a book on theology. And there's also translations that have been done of it. Mufti Abdurrahman ibn Yusuf was a really great scholar, mashallah. He translated also with commentary on it. You can find it. It's something I'd recommend if you haven't, just at your own pace. Like you can take a class structured, it creates an opportunity. But theology is like the essence of religion, you know? Because you're not just praying, you're praying to God. Do you know what I mean? And they're two different things, right? And a lot of us, we pray, but we're not praying to God always. You know, we're not making dua to God, we're just making dua. Does that make sense? Thanks, man. No, I need it for the last. Yeah, sorry. If you guys want to do something upstairs, if you have the but come down in a little bit, okay? Sorry. Important things. And it makes it that much more robust, right? Because there's a difference between like living a life in pursuit of dunya, living a life in pursuit of Jannah, living a life in avoidance of Jahannam, or living a life that is just longing to meet the creator of all of these things, you know, and to have an appeal. When the Prophet ﷺ passes from this world, the angels, they ask the prophets before they are taken, like, do they want to go? That's different. Like, we don't get asked, we're just taken, right? May Allah make the best of our deeds the last of our deeds. It's very real, you know? It can happen anytime. I went to 2 weddings this weekend for NYU alumni. It was really nice gatherings, alhamdulillah. Saturday, I was in Albany. I drove my sister's car. I walked in, I saw all these faces of people I haven't seen in a long time. And it's a wedding, it's a Mubarak gathering. And I cry at everything. So I started crying as soon as I started the khutbah. And very happy, everything's great. I'm close to the GW bridge, and I'm gonna turn to get off. And a woman from the 3rd lane over drove into the car, right? If she had been a second off, she would have driven right into like the door, and the window would have shattered in my face, right? If it could have been anything different. Do you know what I mean? But just like that, very different. I might not be sitting in front of you. It's not a morbid thought. It's a real thought. Do you understand what I'm saying? Right? But the idea with the prophets are that they're asked before they're taken. The Prophet ﷺ is asked as he's taking his last breaths in his home where he is buried. He says, Ma'arafik al-ala, I want to be with the highest companion, right? He wants to be with his God. He doesn't say, take me to Jannah, you know? He doesn't say, he just wants to be with Allah. Do you see what I mean? Religion is very different when it actually starts to become about God and the theology. Conviction is really important in Islam. And you've heard me say it before, and I'll say it again. Islam is not an inherited religion. you can be born into it, and it's patrilineal in that sense, the way Judaism is matrilineal, but fundamentally, the theology necessitates recognizing it as being a discursive theology. Like, you have to be able to know, like, why you practice Islam. And the practice of it isn't that I pray because my mother told me to pray this way, or I dress because my father told me to dress this way. This is why it's okay to disobey your parents when they tell you to do haram, or that they keep you from doing a fard, because you are not a worshiper of your parents, you're a worshiper of God. Do you get what I mean? Right? And if you believe that your parents are the ultimate authority and not Allah, then that's a problem. Do you see what I'm saying? Right? So the conviction has to be there, you know? And the advantage of being in community where there's people that have shared life experiences and you can be understood when you're quite often the only one that's like you in certain spaces for a good chunk of your day, or even where there's just generational gaps and religion is practiced differently, then you take it as an inroad as you start to get settled to then understand the foundational elements of the religion, and that Islam is not a sociological identity variable, right? It's not built in that way that creates out-groups and in-groups sociologically, but it's a theology that has to be explained. And it's embedded in our tradition. So when you pass and you're in the grave, you know, may Allah grant us ease and make it a place of light for us, the angels will come and they're going to ask you, who is your God? Who is your Lord? Right? Man Rabbuk, Ma Dinuk, Man Nabiyuk. These are the questions that are asked of everybody. Who is your Rabb? What is your Deen? Who is your Nabi? And part of this is about the embrace of the theology. You see? And the journey can have oscillation as you're trying to come into understanding of certain things. It's much easier to understand it when you're not taking life and then making sense of who Allah is through your life experience, versus you try to understand who Allah is and then make sense of your life experience through an understanding of who Allah is, not the other way around. Do you get what I mean? So engage in like a structured mode of learning around creed, theology, right? You can take these classes, you sit with somebody who can help to give you an insight. Go and listen to some lectures on the tafsir of Surah Al-Ikhlas. It's going to tell you a lot about what our theology is, of who Allah is to us. Not just the translation, but the actual meaning of it, the tafsir of it. They're drawing and extrapolating understanding from the text. Do you know? And then it can give you opportunity to break away. Why is this important? Because there's a paradox to decision making, that when you don't make a choice, you've essentially chosen. And when you live in a white supremacist society, you are unconsciously bombarded by, or unconsciously impacted rather, by what you are bombarded by in terms of imagery. Our God tells us, "Laysa kamithlihi shay." There's not anything that's like a likeness to him. So anything that you understand Allah to be, you know that He is other than that. But when you walk literally through the streets of America, every church has iconography in it. And you are exposed to not a grammatically masculine God, which is the God of the Quran, but you are exposed to a defined male God. That's why a lot of us believe in a God that's an angry old man in the sky. Do you understand? It doesn't help the case that most religions are just boys' clubs, right? Because it now just permeates in our consciousness. Laysa kamithlihi shay. There's not anything that's like a likeness to Allah, means that there's not a gendered right? So you gotta like engage in an understanding at a base level, read through a text, right? There are three broader theological schools within Sunni Islam: the Ashari, the Maturidi, and the Athari creeds. And they can be seen as making up an entire robust system of theological understanding, the way there's a Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, Hanbali school of legal thought. And there's texts that go hand in hand with each of these. You have respect for them and not engage in talk where you start to talk down upon anybody who practices in one way or learns in one way or the other, right? But if you haven't ever done it, it's something that you should do at this point. You get the books and you read through them and you engage within the parameters of seeing, like, it's just going to enhance my experience with the ritual and the practice. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, let's keep going in the text. Just as a reminder to people, we are going to have iftar after Maghrib, so please stick around. A few people went downstairs to bring the food up. If you leave a little early, which is fine too, next Monday we won't be here. We're going to be at the IC, like 99% inshallah. Sheikh Ammar Shukri is going to be doing a talk, and we'll have iftar still. We'll keep the building open. We'll either be in the prayer room or the 5th floor where we do Jummah, but just keep that in mind. We'll still have iftar, and then we're going to do iftar for the day of Arafah, the 9th of Dhul Hijjah on Tuesday, and we'll have Eid in Washington Square Park, and then brunch inside on Wednesday. All the details, if they haven't been sent out, will be sent out tonight. Sheikh Fayaz, for those of you who follow Jafri fiqh, Sheikh Fayaz in our Shia community will be doing everything a day later, right? So they'll have iftar for the day of Arafah on Wednesday and Eid prayers on Thursday. You're more than welcome to join and get another dinner on Wednesday night and have another brunch on Thursday morning. You can't fast on the day of Eid, so no like kind of double dipping on the fasting. But come and eat and enjoy the food if you'd like. Make special dua for people who are cooking the meals for us right now for iftar as well, if you can. Allah increase them and bless them. Let's continue with that last paragraph, the aim and spirit of awrad. Awrad is the plural of wird, right? So anybody want to continue on? The aim and spirit of awrad. Who can read for us? Yes, I'm a go. Great. So what is Imam Al-Haddad saying here, right? He's giving you now also qualities, metrics, characteristics of what's like the point of all of this, right? So the aim and spirit of awrad is presence with Allah. Aim for it. You will reach it only if you travel the road that leads to it, which is performing the external activities and striving to be present with Allah during them. So what does this mean? You can't gain the benefit of the act without doing the act that will yield what it is that comes only from the completion of the act, right? You want the taqwa from fasting, then you have to fast in order to potentially gain the taqwa. So there can't be like an elementary understanding of ritual and practice. The physical aspects of ritual are in and of themselves not the goal, but there's metaphysical implications. So don't think about this in terms of, well, I'm not a bad person if I don't pray. No, you're not a bad person, but you can't gain what you can only gain from praying your prayers without praying your prayers. And you have to shift the paradigm on what these things are about. So they're not a either or, but a both and. Even if we looked at it purely through the practice of fiqh, right? The exercise is necessary in order to yield what comes only through the performance of the exercise. And the way that the exercise is done is with this intention, this recognition. And intentionality is something that's really important. That's why niyyah is at the beginning of the book, not in the middle or the end of the book, right? He starts with yaqeen, certitude in chapter 1, and then he goes into niyyah, intention. You know why you're doing what you're doing before you set out to do it. If I do physical exercise with the intention of vanity or the intention of wellness, the manifestation is still the same, right? You're still doing the same physical exercise. This is why the hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, that actions are by their intentions, gives like the example that whosoever made hijrah for Allah and their messenger, then they made hijrah for Allah and his messenger. And whosoever made hijrah in order to marry a woman, they made hijrah to marry the woman. They all made hijrah at the end of the day. They all went from point A to point B. It looks exactly the same. What's different is the motivation behind it. Do you get what I mean? So this isn't a religion that's about mindfulness in the sake of just mindfulness. Taqwa is rooted in consciousness qualified by the presence of Allah. There's an ethical imperative that breaks away from relativism. There's no moral relativism in the practice of Islam. There can be ethics that are situational, but you and I are not the determiners of what is fard and what is haram. Allah is the one that determines what is fard and haram. So you can go into the spirit of the law, you can try to understand, well, why can't I eat pork? But at its base, you can't eat pork because Allah said don't eat pork. That's just what it is. He is the lawgiver as well as the lawmaker. That's how it fundamentally functions. Do you get what I mean? The intention rooted in all of this is that you are seeking to build presence with Allah. Maulana Rumi rahimahullah, he says that your goal is to not find beauty, to find love. That's not the goal. The goal is to not seek love, to seek beauty. The goal is to seek everything within yourself that you have built up as an obstacle in relation to it. What makes it hard to feel the presence of Allah? What makes it hard to feel the presence of Allah's mercy, of Allah's love? What gets in the way? Because it's there, right? In the midst of everything, where someone says, has God left me, right? Why am I not marrying the person that I want to marry? Yeah, it's hard, man. It's not something to undermine. It's not easy. Your pain is subjective. May Allah grant you relief. But like, who's feeding you still during the time of all of this? Where's your provision coming from? It didn't stop. What becomes the vision modifier? And so the intentionality here is in this, right? Imam Al-Haddad is saying that your pursuit of this, the aim and spirit of awrad, is presence with Allah. Ma'arifah. You're feeling like that intimacy with the divine. Because everything in this religion goes back to God. Like everything. And you can choose to have it go back elsewhere. Does that make sense? He's also now summarizing this entire 4-chapter section on the wird. So he's wrapping it up. here's what a wird is, and then here's the subsections. In the wird, you have to have a daily recitation of Quran. You got to engage in regular acquisition of ilm, of knowledge. You have to have regular practice of dhikr, adhkar. You have to have in a 24-hour period at least one, if not few hours of reflection, fikr. And now he's saying the whole thing, the whole point of these awrad are so that you have presence with Allah. And that intention has to be there. I can exercise with the intention of vanity. I can exercise with the intention of wellness. They're two different motivations. Do you understand? I can seek to increase in presence and mindfulness so that I can take advantage of a overtly mindless human population. When you are not aware of what you think, I can get you to think about whatever you want to think about, or what I want you to think about, and let you believe that it's what you want to think about. You might think that you dress the way you want to dress, or you might eat the foods you want to eat, or you might spend time the way you want to spend time. There are people who are overtly mindful that are sitting in gatherings saying, how can we shape commercials, advertising, all of this to get them to think that they're making their own choices, but we are getting them to make the choices we want them to make, that takes money from their pocket and puts it into our pockets. When you don't have a belief in an afterlife, and this world is everything that it is, why wouldn't I seek to get as much of the dunya? And why would I care how much of what I take from you really does to you, that you kill yourself in pursuit of money, that you're spending on things that don't even give you real contentment? When you're present with Allah, you can say, I'm so happy that Allah gave me these beautiful people to sit with. And I can just find an air of recognition of just bounty and ni'mah through it, right? I bring the structure to the routine, that it yields an intentionality, that presence now is not something I use to manipulate those that don't have presence, but presence is a source of benefit, it's a source of good. Does that make sense? And the performing of the external activities and striving to be present with God during them. When you persevere in this, you become immersed in the lights of proximity, and the sciences of gnosis emanate upon you, at which your heart becomes wholly intent on Allah, and presence becomes its nature and well-established quality. Why do I want this? Why would somebody want this? Why is it something that I want to strive for, to have this awareness, this presence? It's an important question that you have to answer for yourself. If you turn to the person next to you, and just this part, these lines, when you persevere in this, you become immersed in the lights of proximity, and the sciences of gnosis emanate upon you. Ma'arifah comes to you. What is ma'arifah? The day of Arafah is upon us, right? There's a lot of different ways that the word knowing gets translated into Arabic, or from Arabic we translate. Ilm is knowledge. Fahm is comprehension, right? So if I ask my kid, 2 + 2 = 4, do you know it? They know it. If I say, do you understand that 2 + 2 = 4? It's not just ilm, it's fahm, right? That's a difference in terms of understanding. When the Quran says, li ta'arafu, so that you know one another, that's why we made you into nations and tribes, it's an intimate knowledge, an experiential knowledge. And that's what ma'arifah is. The day of Arafah, you just stand on the plain of Arafah, and you're standing making dua to Allah. So you're building now contentment through your knowing of the divine. at which your heart becomes wholly intent on Allah, and presence becomes its nature and well-established quality. Why? Why do I need this? Why is this something that I should have as a goal? If you can ask the people, talk to the people around you, and then we'll come back and discuss. But actually discuss this, right? Other times, when we're saying break and discuss whatever, you can talk about whatever you want to. Overcome, engage, do the ta'awudh. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. So waswasa is out. Why does my heart need this? Because that's the thing with all of this. The contentment of the heart is rooted in ma'arifah. Why? Just think about it. Why does my heart need this presence? Why does the world need people who have this presence? Why is this something that has to be an objective of Muslims who practice Islam? Just talk to the people around you and then we'll come back and discuss. Go ahead. Okay, so what are we talking about? What's coming up for people? Why is this something that I need? The end result of this presence. Or you could say, we don't need it. And like, why do you not need it? Why would this be beneficial? What did you talk about? Yeah.
So when you understand your presence, you become more aware of like your purpose, like your Sunnah in general. And one of the examples you were talking about, where like, for example, if you take Surah Al-Ikhlas, and if you're just saying the words without like realizing what does it mean, you won't like have this connection with the surah. So it's better to understand rather than just recalling some words all the time.
But why do I want my heart to be present with Allah? Do you know what I mean? Not like just presence in the recitation or, like we're sitting here and some of you are focused on me and I'm focused on you when you're talking. And some of us are like, taking in all other kind of stimuli and there's other stuff going on, right? It's not a good or bad, it's just a thing. But why do I need presence with Allah or the presence of Allah, like a recognition of it? Why is that something, that proximity that he's talking about? What's the benefit of that? Yeah.
Longevity. I think it's going to last longer.
What's going to last longer?
Our connection will, it's not going to fade easily. Nothing's going to sort of like come between us.
But why do you need it? What will that do for you? Okay. Yeah. What else?
There's ayat of Surah Rahman, وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ جَنَّتَانِ, for the one that is fearful of the stage of Allah, the presence of Allah, maqam or stage of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them jannatan, people who didn't pass away yet but still living on this earth. They can feel the pleasure of paradise in this world as well. To gain, let our hearts grow to that degree where we meet Allah in qalbun salim before we pass away.
Yeah, amazing, right? And what's going on there when that happens? What were you going to say?
Something similar. I was just reflecting that one of the things that people describe about the Prophet ﷺ is that because he was always in a state of presence with Allah, that the Sahaba said that when they were in his presence, they felt like they were literally looking at paradise. When they left it, was his presence, that they went back to, it wasn't the same. And it's miraculous, like Prophet ﷺ, he came in a very difficult society, but within 23 years he was able to cultivate the best men and women that in history. And
Yeah, it's insane.
That it's amazing, and that cascaded from him obviously on the Sahaba, and that's how we have this deen. The Suhbah is through the presence of Allah. If we think about it, and we see Islamic history, that the communities that were really successful, we see these spiritual communities in different parts of the Muslim world, is because it's not because of conquest, right? It's because of the spiritual masters and the people of spirituality that really cultivated that love of Allah and love of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And even in our time, for example, like I was reading the autobiography of Malcolm X just a few days ago, and just when you read it, like you feel his presence. It's because like he was only like Orthodox Muslim for 1 year of his life, but that 1 year that he was Muslim, just the transformation that he's going through in that, and then when you read his autobiography, like how many people have converted to Islam after his life, and then it's like we have these people in our midst that have that level of sincerity and connection to Allah. So if all of us go for that, yes, we will still have our preferences. Yes, we still have work to do. We still have to interact with each other. But I think just those interactions will become more natural, and I think what we seek from each other, what we gain from each other, will be beyond just worldly gain. It'll be something which is much deeper. So, and that can only happen if each of us works on our presence with Allah, in spite of flaws, it's working on it, and encourages each other. And I think that's important.
And you think, right, there's different parts to this. The Prophet ﷺ not only knows who Allah is to him, right? So that's one thing. Just because you know something doesn't mean that you are present in that knowing, right? It doesn't assume that, right? But not only does he know who his God is, but he also then has a presence with that God, both in a recognition of Allah's presence, but also in his heart is that aspect of ma'rifah. There's that intimate knowing. And then just think about like how he lives his life. Do you know what I mean? Like not any isolated part, but every part of his life. Like how does he do things? Kind, generous, compassionate, just, equitable, anti-racist, anti-every form of hatred and bigotry. It's informed through that presence, right? You can't have that presence and be a jerk. You can't. You can't have that presence and be in a place where you mistreat. You can be in a place where you still deal with difficulty. You can be in a place where you're still trying to understand and comprehend. The Prophet leaves from Taif and he turns to Allah and says, have you forsaken me? Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha asks him, what is the most difficult day in your life? And he doesn't say, Ya Aisha, we don't complain. He said Taif was the hardest day in his life. But there's still presence there. The presence that comes when revelation has a gap for some years, the Prophet thinks he did something. He doesn't say you people did something and now there's no revelation. He thinks I did something and now there's no revelation. Do you see the difference? And then you're able to find like meaning in things. The Prophet, he has a daughter by the name of Zainab. Zainab bint Muhammad is the eldest daughter of the Prophet, born to him from Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha. Zainab bint Muhammad has a beautiful love story with a man by the name of Abul As. And before the Prophet is a prophet, Zainab, she shows that she feels a certain way towards Abul As, and Abul As demonstrates this too. When you're in love with somebody, you have attentiveness. This is what these next paragraphs are going to talk about how when you really love, you can't do anything other than be attentive, because you just want to listen to everything the one that you love has to say. And there's a long kind of story that goes into this. And maybe there's a benefit in sharing it, so why not? So Zainab bint Muhammad, she shows that she likes Abul As. Abu al-As once comes now to the Prophet ﷺ and says that, I want to marry your daughter. And the Prophet doesn't say, I already know that she likes you and you like her. But he says, I have to ask her what she thinks. It's not a religion where just because you are the father, you get to just decide what the daughter does. The Prophet of God goes and asks his daughter, even where he already knows the answer. He says, Abu al-As has asked for your hand in marriage, what do you think? And the hadith says that she just simply smiles, she blushes, she lowers her face. The Prophet already knew. They get married to each other. Then the Prophet at some point gets wahi, revelation, and he is now a prophet of God. And these two are already married to each other. And Zainab tells her husband Abu al-As that my father has been made a prophet and the last prophet to all of mankind. And I'm now Muslim. Would you become Muslim too? And Abu al-As says, I can't become Muslim like this. The people will say, I only became Muslim because my wife was the daughter of Muhammad. And Zainab says, I'm still with you. They're still together. The Prophet then makes hijrah to Medina. And everybody's going to Medina. And Zainab comes to her father, who is the Prophet, and says, let me stay in Mecca. And the Prophet, who knows what it means to love someone because he loved Khadijah so much, he doesn't say, I'm the messenger of God. You're going to turn away from me. But he says, be with the one that you love. Stay with your family. The Battle of Badr happens. Zainab sees Abu al-As putting on his armor. What are you doing? I am of Quraysh. I have to go and be with the Quraysh. Zainab sees her husband go to fight in a battle against her father. Makes dua, Ya Allah, give victory to my father, but let my husband come home safe. He's a prisoner of war. We win Badr, if you don't know that. And the Meccans are told that if you want to exchange the freedom of these captives, bring something for them. And so they tell people in Mecca. And Zainab looks through her home and she finds a necklace that belongs to her mother, Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha. She gives it to the emissary. He goes to Medina. It goes from hand to hand to hand until it comes in the hands of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He sees the necklace. The hadith says he looks at it, he takes scent of it. He knows that it's Khadija's necklace. That's what love does. That's what presence does. He says to his companions that this is Khadija's necklace. Are you okay if I give it back? And are you okay if I send it home with Abu al-As? And they say, yes, of course, the messenger of God. Why would you want to have anything less than that? And to end the story, so that it's not just stops there, the Prophet gets revelation, and he tells Abu al-As that, Ya Abu al-As, Allah has told me that no longer can the mu'min and the mushrik be married to each other. If it's okay, can you send my daughter home? Abu al-As goes back with the necklace and gives it to Zainab. And he says, we are going now. And she says, are you leaving again? And he says, I'm not the one that's leaving, you're leaving. Your father has said that you have to go home. We can't be married anymore. He said that's what God told him. Zainab is pregnant at this time. This is all in the seerah. When she departs, the mushrikeen, they know she is the daughter of Muhammad. And they just lost Badr. They say, we're not going to let the daughter of Muhammad just leave. They strike this pregnant woman, and she falls on the ground, and she experiences a miscarriage. The seerah was what makes the Quran real. Zainab goes back to her husband's home, stays there for some time, for her former husband, and then again departs. And now she's in Medina and does not marry anybody for 6 years. Zayd ibn Haritha, he along with some others, are at a point now 6 years later when caravans are coming, they are stopping the caravans. Abu al-As is in a caravan, Zayd ibn Haritha stops the caravan, Abu al-As leaves from the caravan with nothing. He's now in Medina, at the outskirts of Medina. Nobody is going to do anything for this man. Medina is not close to Mecca, it's not down the street. He's got to figure out, what do I do in a sea of people who don't want to do anything for me? But he knows that the love of Zainab is true and real. So he goes to Zainab and he knocks on the door and she's elated. He's Muslim and he's like, I'm not Muslim. I need your protection. And she says, Father of my children, you have my protection. They pray, the Muslims, the next day, and then at the end of the prayer, Zainab says that Abu al-As is under my protection. He's free. The Prophet reiterates asking what she's saying, and then says, you heard it, Abu al-As is under her protection. And some days pass, and he's getting ready to go back to Mecca. And Zainab says, would you become Muslim? And he says, not like this. I can't. What will the people say? He leaves and goes to Mecca. And he stands in the city of Mecca publicly and says, do I owe anybody anything? Any debts? Some people come and say, you don't owe me anything. And some people say, you owe me something. And he settles the debts. And once it's done, he says, anybody else, do I owe you anything? They say no. And he says, then know this. I bear witness and testify that there is nothing worthy of worship except Allah. And I bear witness and testify that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. And he goes back to Medina. And he now tells his wife that I'm Muslim. She did not lose hope in it, even for a minute. They spend 1 year together in this way. And then Zainab passes. And then shortly thereafter, Abu al-As passes. And this is common. Even you have elder people who they're so in love with their beloved that when one passes, typically shortly thereafter the other passes, because the heart can't live without the one that it loves. That's what love can do for you. You understand? It makes you acutely aware. The presence of the Prophet, the presence of the divine, he knows how to interact with his daughter. The presence that he has allows for there to be meaning in a simple necklace that comes into his palm of his beloved who passed prior to them being in Medina. That's why you want to have that presence. It makes things that sometimes seem so futile actually things that are so abundant with meaning. It doesn't necessitate then chasing after what people believe, money, wealth, horses, cars, whatever else, that's what I'm going to chase after. No, just what I have in front of me, that's all that I really need. All I need is you. All I need is the gift of like a good friend. All I need is this simple stuff that I have, not so much more. That's what the presence does. Do you understand? Does that make sense? And as Imam Al-Haddad, he continues, he gives a depiction that you don't want to be confused. This is not telling us in the end of this paragraph that you just forget about people, because the Prophet, who was so aware and full of presence of the divine and aware of the proximity of the divine, he didn't do anything other than for 23 years help people and serve people and be there for people. Just to finish the chapter, beware of leaving a wird for fear of not being able to persevere in it, for this is foolishness. What does it mean? Don't let shaitan get in your head. It's stupid to say, I'm not going to do it because I won't be able to get it done, or I won't be able to have consistency in it. You start someplace. A minute is better than nothing. This is not a practice that says, if I can't do it this much, then I shouldn't do it at all. If you can read one verse of the Quran, don't say it's only one verse, then just say, I'm reading the verse of it, and that's it, and work within your capacity. Beware of leaving a wird for fear of not being able to persevere in it, for this is foolishness. You should not do in each period of time whatever happens to suit your energy and free time. On the contrary, you should have a minimum that you perform, which you can add to whenever you feel energetic, but never fall below when you feel lazy. Meaning what? Read one verse every day. If a second day or a week from now or a month from now you can read two, great. But always read at least one. If you can read a page, amazing. You're not in competition with the person sitting next to you. It's just you taking on you. So the I that is me is not afraid to meet the one I can potentially become tomorrow. You go at a pace that makes sense. Does that make sense? So there is a floor. This is what I know I have capacity to do every single day. What is a verse of the Quran? Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. That's all you gotta do if you're doing one verse a day. The shortest verse of the Quran says what? Thumma nadhir. That's it. It's mentioned in Hanafi fiqh books because when you are learning the fara'id and the wajibat and the sunnahs of prayer, the fara'id in the Hanafi school does not require you to know Fatiha from day one. You just recite the shortest verse in the Hanafi school. That's the obligatory. Is that how you should pray? No. But if somebody's new to Islam and Islam becomes now in their lifestyle, the next prayer is fard upon them. They're going to go from one step to the next. This is why if you don't know your fiqh, you should come to our Wednesday night class where we talk about this. Because there's a difference in knowing versus teaching how to. We make it really hard for a lot of people when we're giving them the end product rather than the philosophy on education that yields for them phases. And that's not just if you're a convert, but if you're just revisiting your relationship with prayer. You didn't pray for many days, you don't know how to pray, and now it's there. There's legally excusable reasons as to why you might only do what's obligatory as you're learning what's wajib and you're learning what's recommended. Does that make sense? But you got to start somewhere. So start with some part to it. And then he says, know that hastening to acts of goodness, being careful with acts of worship, and persevering in obedience constitute the way of the prophets and the saints, meaning the awliya, both at the beginning and end of their affair, meaning that from day one till the last day, that they're doing what they can get done, that this is the world of exertion. As you get older, it doesn't mean that you do less, and as you're younger, you don't wait to do what you can today until tomorrow. There's a lot of people who have a lot of regret around Hajj these days because Hajj for Americans is not as easy as it was before. And they're kicking themselves saying that, I wish I had just gone when I had the ability to go. Now I gotta go with this wonky system and I don't have the privilege that I had that the rest of the world did not have. So learn from it. Why are you waiting on other things that you can do today till tomorrow? What if tomorrow doesn't come? What if the woman drove into me instead of the fender of the car? What would I do? And you can say, don't think like that. But that's exactly the way you have to think, so that there's a value to every minute. So I'm not going to sit and waste time arguing over silly things with my beloveds. But when I leave, I say I love you. When they go to bed, I say I love you. When we wake up, we say we love each other. Right? Right? Because you don't know. And you have to think about it that way. So know that the hastening to acts of goodness, this is the way of the prophets and the saints, both in the beginning and end of their affair. For they are the creatures with the most knowledge of God. It doesn't say that they have all of the knowledge. It doesn't say that they have absolute knowledge. It says they have the most, and language is important, meaning that there's still things that one can know. The most knowledge of God, and it is therefore not surprising that they are the most worshipful, obedient, and fearful of Him, Azza wa Jal. That it translates, that ma'arifa is just going to bring you to do good things. It's going to get you to be in places where you're not self-serving, but you're serving Allah through service of His creation. The attentiveness of a servant is equal to his love for his Lord. Love is consequent upon knowledge. Inasmuch as God's servant grows more knowledgeable of Him, so also shall he love Him more and worship Him more abundantly. If you become too busy amassing worldly things and following passions to have awrad and keep to acts of worship, strive to give your Lord an hour at the end of the day when you occupy yourself with glorifying Him, asking forgiveness, and other kinds of devotions. It has been related that Allah the Exalted has said, Son of Adam, give me an hour at the beginning of your day and an hour at its end, and I will take charge for you of all that is in between. It has also been related that the record of a servant is shown to God at the end of each day. And if at its beginning and end there is goodness, Allah Azza wa Jal says to the angel, erase what is in between. This is Allah's graciousness to us and all people, but most people are not thankful. I'm going to ask my kids to pass out dates. Can you pass out dates to everybody? Maghrib is coming in right now, so if you're fasting, break your fast on the date. But so that we don't leave it just with me throwing words at you, talk to the people next to you. What are you taking away from the conversation? And we'll wrap up in like 3 minutes. But you want to take away concrete takeaways. What is it bringing up for you? Let yourself be comfortable with your vulnerability, and let the person that's talking to you see that you actually want to hear what they're saying. And we'll come back and wrap up, and then we'll pray Maghrib, and we'll have iftar, inshallah. So just the takeaways, and then we'll come back and discuss. Go ahead. Okay. What are some of the things we're taking away from tonight? Anybody? Maybe a few people before we wrap up. Yeah.
One's related to the reflection will increase presence and awareness.
Reflection will increase presence and awareness. Amazing, right? It's a simple religion. Allah built us in ways that are not so hard to understand. You just have to think about it and then do something with what it is that you learn about yourself. Reflection will increase in presence and awareness. Other thoughts? Other takeaways?
Presence will increase in contentment and meaningfulness.
And presence will increase in contentment and meaningfulness, right? Do you see how what we're saying has substance to it? It's not a slogan. It's not a copy and paste thing that you just mindlessly read on devices that are purposely built for mindlessness, right? The way you're saying it is different than how you might read it. So you have to take it and then let it actually resonate and say, wow, these things make sense. So now what do I do with this information? What else? What are other things that we can take away? And even if it's just these two, these are amazing things to realize, right? Yeah.
For me personally,
Yeah. Right? It becomes harder to deny responsibilities, fulfillment of things. The Prophet ﷺ was the hardest worker outside of his house, but he was also the kindest person inside of his house. He didn't exert a dynamic of saying, what are your rights over me in the sense of what do you owe me, but how is it that I serve you? And doing what he did outward of the house, inside he still comes in and he gets things done. And that's where there's this balance that comes from this presence, right? Other thoughts? Yeah.
The attentiveness a servant has is equal to the love that he has for him.
Yeah.
The saints really.
The attentiveness that the servant had, it creates kind of an equality for the love of Allah. There's like a directly proportional relationship there, right? That attentiveness helps to yield love, love helps to yield attentiveness, right? But you know these things. It's not to be crass in our descriptions. If you've ever been in love with somebody, right? Think about the first person you ever had a crush on in your life. Do you know what I mean? And if you're like, I've never done that, you're lying. It's not possible. And every single time this person would come into interaction, are they looking at me? Are they not? Right? The number of Muslim kids that I sit and talk to, and adults, and they'll sit in a chair with me and be like, man, this girl said salam to me. You think she wants to marry me? I'm like, no, she does not want to marry you. She just said salam to you. That's all she did. What is wrong with you? Right? But that's what happens when you're overtly attentive and awake. Everything that the one your heart is attached to is something that you're trying to find meaning from. Do you know? That's where they're all connected to each other. Do you get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Right? And yes, just if somebody says hi to you, it doesn't mean that they want to be the parent of your children. The two things don't go hand in hand with each other always. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. What sits with me is that story when you were talking about the compassion and the family dynamic in that situation.
It's so beautiful, right?
So beautiful, because you would think that normally any prophet of God would be like, how dare you, even stay with this man, he's not going to burn, right? Let alone our parents, that's such a big deal, who it is, even if they're Muslim, right? That was really just that compassion and just understanding that family dynamic and how we approach it. I think something that everyone.
That's why you have to know the seerah, right? They're not stories only, but it makes the Quran concrete. And it makes it hard for somebody to say that, well, my culture this, or my grandfather this, or your mother this, right? You can't be racist if you see the way the Prophet lived the Quran. The two can't go hand in hand with each other, right? There's no fundamental way. How can somebody validate that type of behavior when they read and understand the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Do you see what I mean? How can you validate only interacting with people who come from the same race, the same culture, the same social class, or looking with disdain at people who have less than you? Do you get what I mean? Right? And it's a beautiful story. And the other thing is also, you can just read these stories and they're beautiful. And it can impact your heart, right? It can remind you, why am I Muslim in the first place? You go back to the early generations, not in a puritanical sense, but in a sense that allows for vitality and rejuvenation of your inside. Does that make sense? Okay, let's take a pause here. Next Monday, we're going to likely not be here, unless something changes, which might. I might ask Sheikh Hamar if he wants to join us on Tuesday on the day of Arafah, but I don't know if that's what I'm going to do. I'm just saying this out loud so people know. So look at the emails, check social media, but we'll let people know. But more likely than not, we'll be there on Monday night, because that's what he and I had agreed to. On Tuesday, I'm going to do a halaqa probably around 6 or 6:30. A big part of it is just going to be making dua, right? That the Prophet ﷺ, he says that Like the best of du'as are the du'as of Arafah. You know what I mean? That's what you want to do. We're in Dhul Hijjah. These days are the best days to do good deeds, which also means don't do bad things on these days. If you don't regularly pray your prayers, try your best to pray your prayers. Do the fara'id. If you struggle with doing all 5, try to do as many as you can. These aren't days to be mean to people. These aren't days to gossip. They're not days to backbite. And start to think from this day, what are the du'as that I want to make on the day of Arafah? Right? You remember how we made du'a at the Qiyam in Ramadan? I don't know if that's what we're going to do on Tuesday, but there's a chance. And if you remember, for those who were there's parts in the time when we make du'a together as a community, we can just make whatever du'as that you want. It's not a time where you want to just be kind of fully scripted. You also want to get your heart ready. If you get fast in these days, it's recommended to fast the first 9 days. But definitely if you have the physical capacity to fast on the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, which will be next Tuesday, a week from tomorrow. May Allah allow us to reach it and benefit from it. It's not like any other day. I went for Hajj the first time in 2005. It was in the first months that I started working here, and I was fully volunteer. And I'm so happy that I went for Hajj that year. All I asked Allah to do was put barakah in this. And I can still remember standing on the plain of Arafah. It's not something you can forget. If I'm ever blessed to be there with you, I will show you where I stood in the year 2005, because I remember not only the exact spot, but what the person standing next to me and behind me looked like. Because it's a moment you can't forget. If you have the means to go for Hajj, go for Hajj. It's the only pillar that we're taught in the Quran with this condition. The other prayers and pillars have the same things. If you can't give zakah, you don't give zakah. If you can't fast, you don't fast. If you can't pray fully with your body, you pray with as much as you can. If your body doesn't move, you move your eyes. You can't do that, you pray with your consciousness. If you can't pray with your consciousness, you just don't pray. But Hajj is the only thing that Allah says if you have the means to do explicitly, which means there's some people who will not have the means to do it. That's not each one of us. Some of us have the means and you're choosing not to go. You can't do that. So think about it for next year as best as you can. And allow for yourself to then experience these things. What kind of practice is this? That you just have to do it once and then it's going to be that transformation. Do you get what I mean? But while we're here, these are days we can still take advantage of.